Hello everyone, my name is Natalie Weeks and this is my Peeps assignment. Before I get started, I just wanted to make a couple of statements. The first is that everyone in my family speaks English, and the second is, except for one gentleman who I'll reference toward the end, we all consider ourselves to be Black. So with that, my parents, Ronald and Janice, have two children, myself, and then I have a brother who's about 10 years younger than me, named Ronald Jr. He just finished up his first year at Auburn University pursuing electrical engineering. So I thought I would start with my mom's side of the family just because I wasn't able to go as far back with her side of the family. And I'm sorry I'm talking fast, but I just want to make sure that I get this all covered in 8 minutes. So my mom has her associate's degree. She's an administrative assistant, has done that for her entire career. Um, she's one of 8 children, and she actually grew up in a small town called Bruton, Alabama, and lived there for several years. My dad got married and worked at a school. The school closed, and so they decided to relocate back to my dad's hometown, Sunflower, and they ended up in Birmingham because back during the recession, the state of Alabama decided to close a lot of their state-run mental health facilities or hospitals. And so the place where my mom worked closed and it was a recession, so there were very few jobs available. They spent several years unemployed and they found work in Birmingham, and so they've been there for the past few years. Looking back at her parents, her mom, Carrie, my grandmother, only had her GED, which I think played a huge role in all of their children. Carrie and Edmund's children have some college education. The majority of them have some type of college degree or post-secondary education. And we think that my mom thinks that a lot of it is attributed to the fact that they saw what their mother went through without having an education, and yet their father, having his master's, had a lot more opportunity to do things because of that degree. Um, their father, my granddad, um, taught. He was a teacher, which is a career that is very prevalent in my in my family. He taught general and special education, and he also was a farmer. He also spent some time in the military, so a man of many hats. Um, he was one of 5 children, and while he and my grandmother spent the majority of their lives in the same community, the same area, a lot of their siblings did not. A lot of their siblings took part in the Great Migration, which of course is where a large number of blacks moved from rural southern areas to the larger northern cities to find better work and equality and things like that. So I just wanted to note that while my family stayed in Alabama, I have a lot of extended family who live up north because of that. Looking back, I won't go into detail about um, my great grandparents. I will say that the jobs that they have were very based on what was socially and culturally appropriate at the time. So they had either no formal education or some secondary education. And remember, back then, segregated schools, so the quality of education that we would consider to be secondary is not the same. The men were farmers, the women were homemakers. Um, Two things to note: my maternal great grandmother, was a community teacher. She had been taught to read, and so she taught the kids in the Black community how to read. And then one of my great grandfathers, when I was talking to my aunt about it, she said that he was kind of the neighborhood community doctor. So I put natural healer there because that's really the type of medicine that he practiced, knowing what roots were good for medicinal purposes and plants and things like that. So that's kind of my maternal side of the family. Let's take a look at my dad's side, the paternal side. My dad had some college and trade school, and actually, the year he was scheduled to graduate last semester, the state changed the mandated requirements for the degree he was pursuing, and he needed 2 more classes, did not go back and finish. Interestingly enough, he was then, without a degree, given the opportunity to teach the very um, program that he did not get a degree in. So he was an adjunct faculty member at a community college for a number of years. So there's that teaching career in there again. Um, he grew up in Sunflower, Alabama. Again, with my mom, they relocated to Birmingham a few years ago. I moved to his dad because mainly I did not get to know him until much later in life, in his life. My granddad had a high school diploma, spent many years in the Marines. He was an aircraft mechanic there, and also did some carpentry work for the post office after leaving the Marines. He's one of six children, grew up in a very small town, southern Mississippi called McLean. My grandfather and his family, they were actually his second family. They were part of the Great Migration. He actually relocated them to Chicago, which is where he spent most of his adult life. And then he moved back to McLean, Mississippi, when he was younger. If you look at his parents, um, very same thing that we saw in my maternal great grandparents, no formal education, community teacher, farmers, property owner, homemaker. Um, I wanted to end with my paternal grandmother because this side of the family is really kind of where I grew up and who I know the most about. And interestingly enough, I call my grandmother Augusta our family historian, and it's because of her really that I was able to go back all five generations. Thanks to her, she, surprise, was a teacher. She had her master's in early childhood. Early childhood, she taught for 24 years, had two children, was one of three, and grew up in Sunflower, Alabama, spent her whole life there, except for the very short time that she lived in Chicago before she and my granddad divorced. Interesting story about how she got her master's degree. Um, Back during the time, well after Brown versus Board, mind you, the district where she lived decided that they would integrate, well, they were actually mandated to integrate the teacher workforce. And so they passed this requirement that all teachers have their master's degree. And according to my grandmother, this was because they wanted, it was an attempt to keep black teachers out of the schools. And not to be outdone, this lady decided, okay, well, I'll just go back and get my master's degree. And she did. um, and she was one of the first teachers to integrate the schools in the area. So that's pretty awesome. It's a story I love to tell about her. Her mother, Clara, actually was a teacher. Surprise! And a principal. She spent 42 years in the educational system and she had her bachelor's degree. Her husband, George, only had an eighth grade education and was a carpenter. If you go back and look at both of their parents, all of these here, no formal education, and so did very traditional hired work jobs, homemaker. And I'll end with a note about Benjamin Alexander Franklin Fields Sr., who was my great great grandfather. He is mixed. His father was, excuse me, his mother was actually a slave. His father was one of the slave owners. And he was a young boy before he and his mother were freed, actually. And so he's the one exception that I referred to at the very beginning. Um, could and at times did pass as a white man, and because of this, was afforded several opportunities that helped to make substantial and changes and monumental significant changes for our family. Was a huge property owner, and to this day, my grandmother owns a lot of property in Sunflower, Alabama. A lot of it, interestingly enough, was the same property where he and his mother were slaves. Um, and so while I can't really say, of course, where my ancestry is from, on the black side or the white side, really. I hope that you guys have learned a bit more about my family. And I'm sorry I'm over the time, but thank you so much for listening.